Richard Coleman sat in his massive penthouse apartment, staring out at the city lights below. At 58 years old, he owned half the buildings he could see from his window. His real estate empire was worth $50 million, but tonight, like every night for the past 2 years, he felt completely empty inside. The apartment was huge, 3,000 square feet of luxury that most people could only dream of. Marble floors stretched across the living room, and expensive paintings hung on every wall. But the place felt cold and lifeless, just like Richard himself. He walked around in his silk pajamas and expensive slippers, but there was nowhere to go and no one to talk to. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. Another business deal, another $1 million opportunity. Richard ignored it. Money used to excite him, but now it just felt like numbers on a screen. He had everything money could buy, but he had lost everything that actually mattered. 2 years ago, his wife Helen had died from cancer. The doctors had tried everything, and Richard had paid for the best treatments money could buy. Private hospitals, experimental drugs, top specialists from around the world. Nothing worked. Helen was gone, and with her went the only person who had ever really loved him. After Helen died, his 2 children stopped talking to him. His son David lived in California now and never called. His daughter Lisa had moved to Europe and sent him cold, formal birthday cards once a year. Richard knew it was his fault. He had been so busy making money that he had forgotten to be a father. He had missed school plays, birthday parties, and family dinners. Now his kids were adults, and they wanted nothing to do with him. In the corner of the living room stood a beautiful black grand piano. It was a Steinway, worth more than most people's cars. Helen had bought it for their 10th wedding anniversary. She used to play it every evening after dinner, filling their home with beautiful music. Richard would sit in his favorite chair and listen, feeling peaceful for the first time each day. Now the piano just sat there, collecting dust. Richard had hired a cleaning service to keep it polished, but no one had played it since Helen died. Sometimes he would walk over and touch the keys, but he could never bring himself to actually play. The silence was too painful. Richard poured himself another glass of whiskey and sat down in his leather chair. This was his routine now, work. All day, come home to an empty apartment, and drink until he fell asleep. He had tried dating a few times, but every woman he met was either after his money or reminded him too much of Helen. He had given up on finding happiness again. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. Richard checked his watch. It was 6 in the evening. He had forgotten that the new cleaning service was coming today. His old cleaning lady had retired, and his assistant had hired someone new. Richard didn't really care who cleaned his apartment as long as they did their job and left him alone. He opened the door to find a small, elderly woman standing in the hallway. She looked to be in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a simple bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a plain blue uniform and carried a bucket full of cleaning supplies. "Good evening, sir," she said in a soft voice with a slight accent. "I'm Maria Santos from Perfect Clean Services. I'm here to clean your apartment." Richard nodded and stepped aside to let her in. "Fine, just do whatever you need to do. I'll be in my study if you need anything." Maria smiled and started unpacking her supplies. Richard watched her for a moment, noting how carefully she handled everything. Most cleaning people rushed through their work, but Maria seemed different. She moved slowly and deliberately, as if she actually cared about doing a good job. As Richard walked toward his study, he heard Maria gasp softly. He turned around to see her standing in front of the piano, her hands clasped together and her eyes wide with surprise. "Oh, my," she whispered, walking closer to the instrument. "This is beautiful. A Steinway Model B. I haven't seen one this magnificent in years." Richard was surprised that she knew what kind of piano it was. Most people just saw an expensive piece of furniture. But Maria was looking at it the way art lovers look at paintings in museums. "It's just gathering dust," Richard said coldly. "My wife used to play it, but she's been gone for 2 years now." Maria nodded sympathetically. "I'm sorry for your loss, sir. Music has a way of keeping our loved ones close to us, even when they're gone." Richard felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. He was tired of people giving him advice about grief and healing. Everyone had opinions about what he should do, but no one understood what it felt like to lose the only person who had ever really loved him. "Yeah, well, it's just a piano now," he said bitterly. "An expensive piece of furniture that takes up space." Maria ran her fingers gently along the piano's edge, careful not to leave fingerprints on the polished surface. "May I ask what kind of music your wife liked to play?" Richard didn't want to talk about Helen, but something about Maria's quiet manner made him answer. Classical music, mostly. Chopin was her favorite. She used to play this piece called Nocturne. In E-flat major every night before bed. Maria's eyes lit up. Ah, Chopin. He understood the human heart like no other composer. That particular nocturne is one of the most beautiful pieces ever written. Richard was getting annoyed. He didn't want to discuss music with the cleaning lady. He just wanted her to do her job and leave him alone with his whiskey and his misery. "Look, I don't really want to talk about it," he said sharply. "Just clean the apartment and leave the piano alone. No one plays it anymore, and that's how it's going to stay." But as he said this, a cruel thought entered his mind. Maria seemed to know something about classical music, which was unusual for a cleaning lady. Maybe she was just pretending to be cultured to impress him. Rich people dealt with that kind of thing all the time, service workers who tried to act like they were more educated than they actually were. Richard felt a mean satisfaction at the thought of exposing her ignorance. It would give him something to feel superior about, which was about the only pleasure he had left these days. "Actually," he said with a nasty smile, "why don't you play something? Go ahead, show me what you know about Chopin. I could use a good laugh." He expected Maria to make excuses or admit that she didn't actually know how to play. Maybe she would try to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star with one finger, and he could feel better about himself by mocking her attempt. But Maria just looked at him with those kind eyes and said, "Are you sure, sir?" "I wouldn't want to disturb your evening." Richard waved his hand dismissively. "Go ahead. I've got nothing better to do than watch the help make a fool of herself." He sat down in his leather chair and took a sip of whiskey, preparing to enjoy Maria's embarrassment. Finally, something interesting was going to happen in his boring, empty life. He was going to get to feel superior to someone, even if it was just a cleaning lady who didn't know her place. Maria walked over to the piano bench and sat down slowly. She adjusted the seat height and placed her hands on the keys. Richard noticed that her fingers were weathered and worn from years of hard work, but they moved with surprising grace as she positioned them on the keyboard. "This is for your wife," Maria said softly, "and for you." Richard settled back in his chair with a smirk, ready to be entertained by what he expected would be a clumsy attempt at playing classical music. He had no idea that in the next few minutes, everything he thought he knew about life, about people, and about himself was about to change forever. Richard sat back in his leather chair, whiskey glass in hand, waiting for the show to begin. He had that cruel smile on his face, the same one he wore when he was about to close a business deal that would leave someone else bankrupt. He was ready to laugh at Maria's pathetic attempt to play classical music on his expensive piano. Maria placed her worn hands on the keys and closed her eyes for a moment. She took a deep breath, as if she was preparing for something much more important than just playing a song. Richard noticed that her whole body seemed to change. The tired cleaning lady who had been scrubbing floors all day suddenly looked different, more dignified, more peaceful. Then she began to play. The first note that came from the piano was so pure and clear that Richard nearly dropped his whiskey glass. It wasn't the clumsy sound he had expected. It was perfect. Then came the second note, and the third, and suddenly the entire apartment was filled with the most beautiful music Richard had ever heard. Maria was playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece that Helen used to play every night. But this wasn't just someone playing the right notes in the right order. This was something completely different. This was magic. Richard's cruel smile disappeared from his face. He sat up straighter in his chair, forgetting all about his whiskey. The music seemed to wrap around him like a warm blanket, filling up all the empty spaces in his heart that had been cold and dark for 2 years. Maria's fingers moved across the keys like they were dancing. Her hands were old and weathered from years of hard work, but they moved with the grace and skill of someone who had been playing piano their entire life. Every note was perfect, every pause was exactly where it should be, and every phrase told a story, but it wasn't just the technical skill that amazed Richard. It was the emotion behind the music. Maria was playing with her whole heart and soul. She was telling a story about love and loss, about joy and sorrow, about the beautiful and painful things that make us human. As the melody continued, Richard found himself thinking about Helen. Not the sick, dying Helen from the hospital, but the healthy, happy Helen who used to sit at this same piano and play this same song. He could almost see her sitting there, her long brown hair falling over her shoulders as she bent over the keys. The music brought back memories he had been trying to forget. Helen laughing at his terrible jokes. Helen dancing with him in their kitchen while dinner burned on the stove. Helen holding his hand during scary movies even though she was the one who was actually afraid. Helen telling him she loved him every single day, even when he was too busy to say it back. Richard felt something wet on his cheek and realized he was crying. He hadn't cried since Helen's funeral, not even when he was alone in his apartment drinking whiskey and feeling sorry for himself. But now the tears were coming, and he couldn't stop them. Maria continued playing, completely lost in the music. She wasn't showing off or trying to impress anyone. She was just sharing something beautiful with the world. Her eyes were still closed, and there was a small smile on her face as if the music was bringing her joy even as she played it. The melody reached its most emotional part, where the notes seemed to climb higher and higher, like someone reaching toward heaven. Richard had heard Helen play this section hundreds of times, but he had never understood what it meant until now. It was about hope, it was about love that continues even after death. It was about the way music can heal a broken heart. As the song continued, Richard noticed things about Maria that he hadn't seen before. The way she held herself while playing wasn't like a cleaning lady who had stumbled across a piano. It was like a professional musician who had been performing for audiences her entire life. Her posture was perfect, her breathing was controlled, and her movements were confident and sure. This wasn't some amateur who had learned a few songs from YouTube videos. This was someone who had been trained by the best teachers, someone who had spent years perfecting their craft. But how was that possible? Maria was just a cleaning lady who worked for a service company, wasn't she? The music began to slow down, reaching the gentle, quiet ending that had always been Helen's favorite part. Maria played each note with such tenderness that Richard felt like his heart was being wrapped in silk. The final notes seemed to float in the air for a moment before fading away, leaving behind a silence that was somehow more beautiful than any sound. Maria opened her eyes and looked at the piano keys for a moment, as if she was saying goodbye to an old friend. Then she turned around and saw Richard sitting in his chair with tears streaming down his face. Her expression immediately changed to one of concern. "Oh no," she said softly, standing up from the piano bench. "I'm so sorry. Sir, I didn't mean to make you sad. I should have just cleaned the apartment like you asked." Richard wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, but he couldn't stop staring at Maria. The mean, bitter man who had been ready to laugh at her was gone. In his place was someone who had just experienced something miraculous. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maria looked down at her hands, suddenly seeming embarrassed. "It was a long time ago, sir. I shouldn't have touched your piano without permission. I'll just finish cleaning now and leave you alone." But Richard wasn't about to let her walk away. Not after what had just happened. He stood up from his chair and walked over to where Maria was standing by the piano. "No," he said firmly. "I asked you a question. Where did you learn to play like that?" "That wasn't just playing piano. That was performing." "That was professional level?" Maria looked uncomfortable, like she wanted to disappear. "I used to play a little bit when I was younger, sir, but that was many years ago." "I'm just a cleaning lady now." Richard shook his head. "No, you're not. Nobody plays Chopin like that just from fooling around when they were young. You're a musician, a real musician. What happened?" Why are you cleaning apartments instead of playing concerts? Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she tried to smile. Life happens, sir. Sometimes we have to give up our dreams to take care of our families, but I'm grateful for the work I have. Not everyone gets to hear such beautiful pianos anymore. Richard felt something stirring in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. It was curiosity mixed with respect and maybe even a little bit of hope. For the first time since Helen died, he was genuinely interested in another person's story. Sit down, he said, gesturing to the couch. Please. I want to hear about your life. I want to know how someone who plays piano like that ends up cleaning houses. Maria hesitated, clearly not used to being asked personal questions by her employers. But there was something in Richard's voice that hadn't been there before. The coldness was gone, replaced by genuine interest and kindness. I don't want to take up your time, sir, she said. Richard laughed, but it wasn't a bitter laugh this time. It was the first real laugh he had had in months. Time? I've got nothing but time. And after what you just did, after the gift you just gave me, the least I can do is listen to your story. Maria sat down on the edge of the couch, still looking uncertain. Richard sat down across from her, leaning forward with interest. The apartment felt different now, warmer somehow. The music had changed something in the air between them. I have all night, Richard said gently, and I have a feeling your story is going to be worth hearing. Maria sat on the edge of the couch, her hands folded in her lap, looking like she wasn't sure if she should stay or run. Richard could see that she was nervous about sharing her story with him. After all, he was just some rich man who had been rude to her minutes earlier. But something had changed between them when she played that piano, and both of them could feel it. I don't really know where to start, Maria said quietly, glancing toward the piano. It feels strange to talk about the old days. I haven't thought about them in a long time. Richard leaned back in his chair, making himself look less intimidating. Start wherever you want. I'm not going anywhere. Maria took a deep breath and began to speak. I was born in Guatemala, in a small town called Antigua. My father was a music teacher at the local school, and my mother worked in a bakery. We weren't rich, but we were happy. My father taught me to play piano when I was 5 years old on an old upright piano that he bought with his savings. She paused, and Richard could see a soft smile cross her face as she remembered those early days. I loved it immediately, she continued. Other children wanted to play outside or watch television, but I just wanted to sit at that piano and make music. My father said I had a gift, but I think I just loved it so much that I was willing to practice for hours every day. Richard found himself genuinely interested in her story. How good did you get? By the time I was 15, I was performing with the Guatemala National Symphony Orchestra. I won several competitions and got a scholarship to study at the conservatory. In Guatemala City, it was like a dream come true. Richard's eyes widened. The Guatemala National Symphony Orchestra wasn't some small-town band. It was a real, professional orchestra. Maria had been a serious musician, the kind who performs on stages in front of thousands of people. What happened next? He asked. Maria's smile faded a little. I studied at the conservatory for 3 years. I learned everything I could about classical music, about performance, about the great composers. I was planning to audition for conservatories in Europe or America after graduation. My teachers said I had the talent to play anywhere in the world. But you didn't go to Europe or America for school? Richard said. No, Maria said, her voice getting quieter. In 1982, when I was 21, things started getting very dangerous in Guatemala. There was a civil war going on, and the government was targeting anyone they thought might be against them. Musicians, teachers, students, anyone with education was suspicious. Richard had heard about the problems in Central America during the 1980s, but he had never really paid attention to the details. It had always seemed like something happening far away that didn't affect him. One night, soldiers came to our house, Maria continued. They were looking for my father because he had been teaching songs that they said were anti-government. They took him away, and we never saw him again. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. They killed him? We never found out for sure. Maria said, wiping away a tear. But people who got taken away by the soldiers usually didn't come back. My mother was terrified that they would come back for me because I was educated and because I had been performing in the capital city. Maria stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city lights. Richard watched her, trying to imagine what it would be like to have your whole life destroyed by violence and fear. My mother used every penny she had to get me out of the country, Maria said. She sold our house, our furniture, even my father's piano. She gave all the money to a man who promised to help people cross the border safely. How old were you when you came to America? 22? I spoke very little English, and I had no money and no family here. The man who helped me cross the border took me to Los Angeles, where there were other people from Guatemala. I lived in a tiny apartment with 6 other women, and we all worked wherever we could find jobs. Richard tried to imagine this accomplished. Young musician who had been performing with symphony orchestras, suddenly finding herself in a foreign country with nothing. What kind of work did you find? At first, I worked in a restaurant kitchen washing dishes. Then I got a job cleaning office buildings at night. During the day, I went to English classes at the community college. I was trying to learn the language, so I could maybe get a job teaching music or playing piano somewhere. But you never got back into music? Maria turned away from the window and sat back down on the couch. I tried. I went to auditions, I applied to music schools, I even played piano in a few restaurants and hotels. But it was very difficult. My English wasn't good enough and I didn't have the right connections. Most importantly, I didn't have money for the clothes and the lifestyle that professional musicians need. Richard was beginning to understand. In his world, talent alone was never enough. You needed money, connections, and the right background to succeed in competitive fields like classical music. After a few years, I met Carlos, Maria continued. He was from Guatemala too, and he was working in construction. We fell in love and got married. I was happy to have someone who understood where I came from and what I had been through. Did you keep playing piano? Sometimes when I could find a piano to practice on. Carlos understood how important music was to me, so he would drive me to churches or schools where I could play. But we were focused on building a life together. We had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. Richard could see where this was going. You had to focus on raising your family. Exactly. Carlos was working very hard in construction, but it was dangerous work and the pay wasn't very good. I was working as a housekeeper for wealthy families during the day, and sometimes I cleaned offices at night. We needed every dollar we could earn to pay rent and buy food for our children. Maria's voice was full of love when she talked about her children. They were so smart and beautiful. We wanted to give them opportunities that we never had. We wanted them to go to college and have good careers. Everything we did was for them. Where are they now? My son Roberto is a doctor in Chicago. My daughter Linda is a teacher in Phoenix. My youngest daughter, Carmen, is a nurse in San Diego. They all graduated from college, and they all have good jobs and families of their own. Richard could hear the pride in Maria's voice. You must be very proud of them. I am. Carlos and I worked 16-hour days for 20 years to pay for their education. We never bought a car that wasn't used. We never went on vacations. And we never bought anything for ourselves that we didn't absolutely need. But our children got to go to good schools. And now they have the kind of lives we dreamed of. What about your husband? Is he still working in construction? Maria's face fell, and Richard immediately regretted asking the question. Carlos died 5 years ago. There was an accident at a construction site. A piece of equipment malfunctioned, and he was killed instantly. Richard felt his heart sink. I'm so sorry. He was a good man, Maria said, her voice steady despite her tears. He worked so hard for our family. He never complained, even when his back hurt from lifting heavy things all day. Even when he came home covered in dirt and exhausted, he used to joke that his hands were too rough to touch a piano, but sometimes I would catch him humming the melodies I used to play. Richard was quiet for a moment, trying to process everything Maria had told him. Here was a woman who had been a professional musician, who had lost her father to violence, who had fled her country with nothing, and who had spent decades working multiple jobs to support her family. And through it all, she had maintained her dignity and her love of music. "Why are you still working?" he asked. "Your children are all successful now." "Couldn't they help support you?" Maria smiled. "They try to help, but I won't let them. They have their own families to take care of, their own mortgages and children's college funds to worry about. Besides, I'm not ready to retire. I like to work, but cleaning houses? After everything you've accomplished?" "There's dignity in all honest work," Maria said simply. "And you know what? Sometimes I get to meet interesting people. Sometimes I even get to play piano in beautiful apartments." Richard looked at this remarkable woman sitting across from him and realized something that shocked him. Despite all her hardships, despite losing her father and her husband, despite giving up her dreams of being a professional musician, Maria seemed happier than he was. She had found ways to make meaning out of her life, while he had let his grief turn him into a bitter, angry man. "Maria," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." She looked confused. "For what, sir?" "For the way I treated you when you first got here." "For trying to humiliate you." "For thinking I was better than you because I have money." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "You've lived a much more interesting life than I have. You've overcome things I couldn't even imagine. And you've raised 3 successful children while I've managed to drive my own kids away." Maria shook her head. "You don't need to apologize, sir. You were grieving. People say and do things they don't mean when they're in pain." But Richard wasn't finished. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. Are you happy? After everything you've been through, after all the sacrifices you've made, are you actually happy?" Maria thought for a moment before answering. The next week, Richard found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, looking forward to something. He kept checking his watch, waiting for Maria to arrive for her regular cleaning appointment. When she finally rang the doorbell at 6:00, he practically jumped up from his chair to answer it. "Good evening, sir," Maria said with her usual polite smile. "I hope you've had a good week." "Actually, I have," Richard replied, and he was surprised to realize it was true. "Please come in. And Maria, you don't have to call me sir." "My name is Richard." Maria looked a bit surprised, but nodded. "Thank you, Richard. That's very kind of you." As Maria unpacked her cleaning supplies, Richard noticed that he felt nervous. Not the angry, bitter nervousness he usually felt around people, but the good kind of nervousness you feel when you're about to spend time with someone you're genuinely interested in talking to. "Maria," he said, "I've been thinking about our conversation last week, about your life, about everything you've been through. I wanted to ask you something." Maria paused in her unpacking. "Of course, what would you like to know?" "How do you do it? How do you stay so positive when life has been so hard for you? I've been angry and bitter for 2 years just because I lost my wife. But you've lost your father, your husband, your career, your whole country, and you're still ... dice. You're still happy." Maria sat down on the couch, her cleaning supplies forgotten for the moment. "Can I tell you something, Richard? I wasn't always positive. After Carlos died, I was very angry for a long time. I was angry at God, angry at the world, angry at myself for not being able to save him." Richard was surprised. "You were angry? You don't seem like someone who gets angry." "Oh, I was furious," Maria said with a sad smile. "I stopped going to church. I stopped playing piano. I barely spoke to my children because I was afraid I would say something mean to them. I just worked and came home and sat in my apartment feeling sorry for myself." This was not what Richard had expected to hear. "What changed?" "One day, about a year after Carlos died, I was cleaning a house for a family with a little girl. She was maybe 6 years old, and she was taking piano lessons. She was terrible at it. She could barely play Mary Had a Little Lamb without making mistakes. But she was so proud of herself, and she was so excited to show me what she had learned." Maria's eyes lit up as she remembered. She played her little song, and then she looked at me and said, "Do you know how to play piano?" I told her I knew a little bit, and she begged me to play something for her. So I played a simple Mozart piece, nothing too complicated. How did she react? She was amazed. She said it was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. She asked me to teach her how to play like that. And suddenly I realized that I had been so focused on what I had lost that I had forgotten about what I still had. Richard leaned forward, interested. What do you mean? I still had my love of music. I still had my ability to play. I still had the joy that music brought me. Carlos was gone, but the music he loved was still there. My father was gone, but the songs he taught me were still in my heart. I have been so busy mourning what was lost that I had forgotten to be grateful for what remained. Richard thought about this. So you started playing piano again? Not right away, but I started humming while I worked. I started listening to classical music on the radio. And slowly I started to feel better. Not happy exactly, but not completely. Miserable either. When did you start feeling truly happy again? Maria smiled. The day my grandson was born. My daughter Linda called me from the hospital in Phoenix and she was crying with joy. She said, "Mama, you have a grandson and he's beautiful." In that moment I realized that life doesn't just take things away, it gives things too. New babies, new experiences, new reasons to hope. Richard felt a pang of sadness. I don't have grandchildren. My kids won't even talk to me. Why not? Maria asked gently. Richard sighed. Because I was a terrible father. I was always working, always focused on making money. I missed their school plays, their birthday parties, their graduations. When Helen got sick, they came to the hospital, but they could barely stand to be in the same room as me. They blamed me for not being there for their mother when she needed me. Where were you? Even when Helen was dying, I was still taking business calls, still worried about deals and contracts. I thought I was providing for my family, but really I was just hiding from the things that scared me. Maria nodded, understanding. Fear makes us do strange things. What scared you? Richard had never really thought about it that way. I guess I was afraid of not being successful enough. My own father was a failure. He lost job after job, and we were always poor. I swore I would never let my family go through that. But I got so focused on making money that I forgot why I was making it in the first place. Have you tried talking to your children, explaining how you feel? They don't want to hear from me. My son David sends me a Christmas card every year. But that's it. My daughter Lisa lives in London now, and she changes her phone number every time I try to call her. Maria was quiet for a moment. You know, Richard, I think your children are probably hurt more than they are angry. When someone we love chooses work over us, it makes us feel like we're not important. But I was working for them. I know. And they probably know that too, in their heads. But their hearts remember feeling abandoned. Hearts take longer to heal than minds. Richard felt tears starting to form in his eyes. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to make them forgive me. Maybe you don't need them to forgive you right away. Maybe you just need to show them that you've changed, that you understand what you did wrong and that you're trying to be better. How do I do that? Maria stood up and walked over to the piano. Do you remember how to play? Richard was confused by the change of subject. A little bit. Helen tried to teach me years ago, but I was always too busy to practice. Come sit with me, Maria said, patting the piano bench. Let me show you something. Richard felt nervous, but he got up and sat down next to Maria at the piano. She placed his right hand on the keys and positioned his fingers. This is a C, she said, pressing his index finger down on a white key. And this is a G. If you press them both at the same time, you get a harmony. Richard pressed the keys and heard the two notes blend together into something that sounded peaceful and pleasant. Now, Maria said, let me show you a simple melody that goes with those notes. For the next hour, Maria taught Richard how to play a basic version of Amazing Grace. It was slow and simple, but by the end of the lesson, he was actually playing a recognizable song. More importantly, he was smiling. How do you feel? Maria asked. Good, Richard said, surprised. I feel ... calm. I haven't felt calm in years. That's what music does. It helps us process our emotions. When we're sad, music lets us be sad without drowning in it. When we're angry, music helps us express that anger in a way that doesn't hurt other people. Richard played the simple melody again, enjoying the way the notes sounded together. Helen used to say that music was like prayer. She was right. Music connects us to something bigger than ourselves. It reminds us that we're part of something beautiful. As the weeks went by, Richard found himself looking forward to Maria's visits more and more. She would clean for an hour or two, and then they would sit at the piano together. She taught him simple songs, and he told her about his business, his regrets, and his hopes. Slowly, Richard began to change. He started sleeping better at night. He cut back on his drinking. He began to take interest in his work again, but not in the same obsessive way as before. He started treating his employees better, actually learning their names and asking about their families. Most importantly, he started thinking about his children differently. Instead of focusing on how much they hated him, he started thinking about how much he loved them and how he could show them that love. One evening, as Maria was getting ready to leave, Richard asked her something that had been on his mind for weeks. "Maria, I want to do something for you. You've given me so much, your friendship, your music, your wisdom. I want to give you something in return." Maria shook her head. "Richard, you don't owe me anything. I'm grateful for our friendship too. But I want to help you. You've worked so hard your whole life. You've sacrificed everything for your family. Isn't there something you want? Something you've always dreamed of doing?" Maria was quiet for a long moment. "Well," she said slowly, "there is one thing, but it's probably impossible." "Tell me." "I've always wanted to teach piano to children who can't afford lessons. Poor kids, like I was. Kids who have musical talent but no opportunity to develop it." Richard's eyes lit up. "That's not impossible at all. That's actually a wonderful idea." But it would cost so much money. You'd need to rent a space, buy pianos, pay for insurance. It would be very expensive." Richard smiled. "Maria, I have $50 million sitting in bank accounts earning interest. I think I can afford a few pianos." For the first time since he'd known her, Maria looked speechless. "Richard, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. We're going to start a music program for kids who need it. And you're going to be the teacher." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to say. Say yes. Say you'll help me do something meaningful with my money for once." 3 months after that conversation, Richard stood in front of a small community center in East Los Angeles, watching as workers carried brand new pianos through the front door. He had bought 6 beautiful upright pianos along with benches, music stands, and enough sheet music to fill a small library. The transformation of the empty room into a proper music school had taken weeks, but now it was finally ready. Maria stood beside him, tears streaming down her face as she watched her dream come to life. "I can't believe this is really happening," she whispered. Richard smiled, feeling more satisfaction than he had felt from any business deal in his entire career. "Believe it. Tomorrow you start teaching your first class of students." They had spent weeks planning the program. Richard had hired a coordinator to handle registration and paperwork while Maria had designed the curriculum. They were starting with 20 children ages 6 to 16, all from families who couldn't afford private music lessons. Word had spread quickly through the community, and they already had a waiting list of 50 more kids who wanted to join. "Are you nervous?" Richard asked Maria as they walked into the music room. "Terrified," she admitted with a laugh. "It's been 30 years since I taught piano to anyone except you. What if I've forgotten how to work with children?" "You'll be fine. You have more patience and kindness than any teacher I've ever met. These kids are lucky to have you." The next morning, Richard arrived at the community center early. He wanted to see Maria's first class, even though she had told him he didn't need to come. He sat quietly in the back of the room as 20 nervous children filed in with their parents. The kids came from all different backgrounds. There was 8-year-old Sophie, whose mother worked 2 jobs to support 3 children. 10-year-old Miguel, who lived with his grandmother because his parents were deployed overseas with the military. Teenage twins Jennifer and Jessica, whose father had lost his job 6 months ago and was struggling to pay rent. Maria stood at the front of the room, looking nervous but excited. Welcome, everyone, she said in her gentle voice. My name is Maria, and I'm going to be your piano teacher. Before we start playing, I want each of you to tell me why you're here. What made you want to learn piano? One by one, the children shared their stories. Sophie said she wanted to play songs for her baby brother. Miguel wanted to surprise his grandmother with her favorite hymn. Jennifer and Jessica wanted to start a band together. A shy 6-year-old named Tommy said he just liked the way piano music sounded. As Richard listened to these children talk about their dreams, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope for the future. These kids reminded him of his own children when they were young, full of excitement and possibility. Over the next few weeks, Richard found himself visiting the music center almost every day. He told himself he was just checking on his investment, but the truth was that he loved watching the children learn. Maria was an incredible teacher, patient and encouraging with every student. She celebrated their small victories and helped them through their frustrations. One afternoon, as Richard was leaving the center, he noticed Miguel sitting alone on the front steps, crying. Hey, Miguel, Richard said, sitting down beside the boy. What's wrong? I can't do it, Miguel sobbed. I've been practicing for 3 weeks and I still can't play Happy Birthday without making mistakes. I'm just not good at this. Richard remembered feeling the same way when Maria first started teaching him. Can I tell you a secret? When I started learning piano, I was terrible. Much worse than you are now, Miguel looked up surprised. Really? Really? I made so many mistakes that my teacher probably wanted to give up on me. But she didn't, and you know what I learned? Making mistakes isn't failing, it's learning. But the other kids are getting better faster than me. So what? This isn't a race. Music isn't about being better than other people. It's about expressing yourself and finding joy. When you play piano, how does it make you feel? Miguel thought for a moment. Good, even when I mess up, it still makes me feel good. Then you're doing it right. The mistakes don't matter as long as you're enjoying yourself. That conversation with Miguel made Richard realize something important. He had spent his whole life comparing himself to other people, always trying to be richer, more successful, more powerful than everyone else. But happiness didn't come from being better than others. It came from finding meaning and joy in what you were doing. A few days later, Richard made a decision that surprised even himself. He called his son David in California. Dad? David sounded shocked when he answered the phone. Is everything okay? You never call. I'm fine, Richard said, his heart pounding. I called because I wanted to tell you something. I wanted to apologize. There was silence on the other end of the line. I was a terrible father, Richard continued. I was so focused on making money that I forgot to be present for you and your sister. I missed all the important moments in your lives, and I'm sorry. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did wrong. David was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. Dad, I don't know what to say. I've been angry at you for so long. You had every right to be angry. I chose work over family, and that was wrong. I can't change the past, but I want you to know that I'm trying to be a better person now. Richard told David about Maria, about the music program, about how helping these children had given his life new meaning. He talked about learning to play piano, about understanding that money couldn't buy happiness, about wanting to rebuild his relationship with his children. There's something else, Richard said. I want to fly out to California to meet my grandson. If that's okay with you. David's voice broke a little. Dad, I would like that very much. Tommy has been asking about his grandfather. 2 weeks later, Richard stood in David's backyard, pushing his 4-year-old grandson on a swing set. The little boy giggled as he soared higher and higher, his blonde hair catching the sunlight. Higher, Grandpa, higher! Tommy shouted. Richard laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. Hold on tight, buddy. That evening, after Tommy had gone to bed, Richard and David sat on the back porch, talking like they hadn't done since David was a teenager. You seem different, Dad, David said. Happier. I am different. I learned something important from a very wise woman. I learned that life isn't about what you achieve, it's about who you love and who loves you back. David smiled. Mom used to say something like that. Your mother was a smart woman. I should have listened to her more often. When Richard returned to Los Angeles, he had a surprise waiting for him at the music center. Maria had organized a small concert featuring all 20 students. Parents and siblings filled the room as the children performed the songs they had been learning. Richard watched from the back of the room as 6-year-old Tommy played Twinkle, Twinkle Little Star with perfect concentration. Sophie performed a beautiful rendition of Amazing Grace that brought tears to her mother's eyes. The teenage twins played a duet they had composed themselves, but the most moving moment came when Miguel, the boy who had been crying on the front steps just weeks earlier, played Happy Birthday flawlessly for his grandmother, who beamed with pride from the front row. As the concert ended and families began to leave, Maria walked over to Richard. Thank you, she said simply, for all of this, for giving these children a chance to discover their musical gifts. Thank you, Richard replied, for teaching me that true wealth isn't about money in the bank, it's about the lives you touch and the love you share. That night, Richard sat at his piano in his penthouse apartment, playing the songs Maria had taught him. But for the first time since Helen's death, he wasn't playing alone. He was playing for all the people who had brought meaning back to his life, for Maria, who had shown him the power of resilience and kindness, for the children at the music center, who had reminded him of the joy of learning and growing, and for his son and grandson, who had given him a second chance to be the father and grandfather he should have been all along. The piano that had once represented everything he had lost had become a symbol of everything he had found. Music had healed his broken heart and connected him to a community of people who cared about each other. Richard finally understood what Helen had meant when she said that music was like prayer. It connected you to something bigger than yourself, something beautiful and eternal and full of hope. As he played the final notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece that Maria had played on that first night, Richard smiled. He had learned that life's greatest treasures couldn't be bought with money. They had to be earned through love, kindness, and the willingness to open your heart to the people around you. The cleaning lady who was supposed to give him a good laugh had instead given him something much more valuable. She had given him back his life.